I'm a psychiatrist, and what that means is I'm a medical doctor, a physician that specializes in the function of the brain. In particular, I'm a Christian functional psychiatrist, so that's a little bit different than conventional psychiatrists. So, of course, my initial and original training in conventional psychiatry, we would typically take a medical history, and then do a clinical interview, kind of listen to a patient's symptoms, and then whatever they were having challenges with, come up with a diagnosis, basically a label from the big book of diagnoses, and then prescribe a pharmacological psychiatric medication for that. So that's conventional psychiatry. So, if people were depressed, then we would hear depression and give them an antidepressant. If they were anxious, we would hear that and give them an anti-anxiety medicines. And what medications do is they disrupt some function in the body or brain. Okay, so let's say in some individuals, serotonin and how that gets transported around and to and from the brain cell, that can have an effect on people's mood and anxiety symptoms, and so we'll take a medicine to block that and kind of manipulate those functions. What a functional psychiatrist does is think about how each individual, how we're fearfully and wonderfully made, and we're all biochemically individual. Right? So right down to the DNA libraries in our cells, that library encodes a number of things, including proteins that act as enzymes that kind of they're the engines that run the reactions to make these different neurotransmitters, neurohormones that help us, be able to be awake, to be able to function, to be able to remember things, to be able to sleep, to all these different processes that we do. God's designed these very unique sort of cellular mechanisms and connections that help us be able to do that and really be able to manifest, to express our thoughts, our intentions, right, our mind, what the Bible describes as our heart. So, in other words, theology comes out of our fingertips, right? So the body, including the brain, is really expressing what's going on in the inner man, and that's what the outer man does. And since, from my perspective, since we live in a fallen, sin-cursed world, then all of those things, our mind and our heart, the inner person, as well as the body, our organs, including the brain, they're touched by the fall. So we're all kind of living in this Genesis chapter 3 hangover, where everything we think, do, feel, whether it's our emotions, our actions, they're all affected by that. And we're going through this process since Christ has come and his death, burial, and resurrection. He came to reverse the curse, and we're in the process of that. We've been in that process for about 2,000 years. And so God's common grace is applied in addition to the specific grace of salvation in Christ and his finished work. And so, God has given us all good things to enjoy, and we're to enjoy those things and use the resources that he's given in a way that glorifies him and for our good, right? So that's the chief end of man, is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. And so he's built things in creation, into creation, to help his people. And so in my worldview, medicine is part of that. It just has to be redeemed like everything else in the created order. And it has to be used and wielded properly, because like anything in creation, right? So think about fire. Fire can help us make a good meal, or it can be destructive. And so we have to be careful, cautious, discerning, and wise when it comes to how we use God's gifts. And so that's what I do in my practice. I don't just try to figure out a label and then write a prescription based on that label, because basically, the DSM, that's a big book of the different diagnoses in psychiatry, and it's a collection of descriptions. So those are basically word pictures, and it kind of gives us a language and be able to organize how we talk about what people are experiencing and how they may their particular kind of suffering. But those labels don't give us any explanation. They don't really help us understand the why. And so that's why that language can be helpful in communicating or trying to make sure we're talking about the same thing. But that's about as far as it goes, because things that are descriptive, they don't have that explanatory power. And so what I'm most interested in is trying to find what are some of the physical things, right? Whether it's down to those DNA libraries and how they're expressed in biochemical functioning, to kind of help take off some of the stress, heat, and pressure that get in people's way of doing what we're called to do, right? Which is to love God with all our heart, mind, soul, strength, hence strong mind psychiatry. And then once we're doing that well and we've got that vertical relationship squared away, then we're ready to do the horizontal relationship of loving and serving others. So that's kind of the philosophy of my practice and what I do.